The massive space station hung in the darkness like a giant metal flower. Its silver petals stretched out in perfect circles around a glowing center where the most powerful beings in the galaxy made their decisions. Ambassador Jake Morrison had seen many impressive sights in his 43 years, but nothing quite like the Galactic Council headquarters at Kepler Prime. Jake walked through the curved hallways that seemed to bend and twist in ways that hurt his human brain to follow. The walls were made of some kind of living metal that shifted colors as he passed. Blue creatures with too many arms floated by without paying him any attention. A group of tall gray beings with eyes like black mirrors stood in a corner speaking, in voices that sounded like breaking glass. The translation device in his ear buzzed constantly as it tried to make sense of the hundreds of different languages being spoken around him. Most of it came through as meaningless noise, but occasionally he caught bits of conversation. The words were always the same. Humans, stubborn, dangerous, foolish. Jake had been Earth's chief ambassador to the Galactic Council for 3 years. Now, he had learned their customs and followed their rules. He had sat through countless meetings where beings from across the galaxy talked about trade agreements and border disputes. But today was different. Today the Council had called him here for something they called a final resolution. The chamber doors opened with a sound like wind chimes. Jake stepped inside and felt his breath catch in his throat. The room was enormous, with walls that curved up and up until they disappeared into darkness above. Thousands of seats filled the space in perfect rings around a central platform where Jake was meant to stand. Most of the seats were filled with creatures he had never seen before. At the front of the chamber sat the Council of 12. These were the most powerful species in the galaxy, and they ruled over billions of worlds. Jake recognized most of them from his briefings. The Velinari looked like walking crystals that caught and reflected light in rainbow patterns. The Thakreen resembled giant praying mantises with golden armor fused to their bodies. The Azarai were living clouds of gas that somehow held their shape and spoke with voices like thunder. But it was the figure in the center that commanded attention. Supreme. Mediator Veltar rose from what Jake assumed was a chair, though it looked more like a pillar of liquid mercury. The being was 12 feet tall and made entirely of what appeared to be living crystal. Light moved through its body in slow waves, and when it spoke the sound came from everywhere at once. Ambassador Morrison of the species called human, Veltar, sighed. The words rang through the chamber with perfect clarity. You have been summoned to receive the final offer of the Galactic Council to your people. Jake had expected this moment for months. Earth scientists had been tracking something they called the Void Swarm as it moved through the outer rim of the galaxy. World after world had simply vanished as the thing consumed everything in its path. The Council had been pressuring Earth to join their collective for protection. I am ready to hear your offer, Jake said. His voice sounded small in the vast chamber, but the translation devices carried his words to every being present. Veltar gestured, and the air above the platform filled with images. Jake saw star charts showing the path of destruction left by the Void Swarm. He saw the last transmissions from dying worlds as the darkness consumed them. He saw the massive fleets of the collective moving to defend their territory. The entity you call the Void Swarm has consumed 43 civilizations in the past cycle, Veltar explained. It grows stronger with each world it devours. Only through unity can the galaxy stand against this threat. Only through the collective can your species survive. More images appeared showing gleaming cities on 100 different worlds. Beings of all kinds worked together, building magnificent structures that reached toward the stars. Ships moved between worlds carrying trade goods and knowledge. It looked like paradise. This is what we offer your people, Veltar continued. Full integration into the galactic collective. Your world will receive fusion technology that will end your energy problems forever. Medical science that will extend your lives by centuries. Transportation systems that will let you travel between stars as easily as you now travel between your cities. Jake felt his heart racing as he saw the wonders being offered. Ships that could cross the galaxy in days. Machines that could cure any disease. Technology that could turn dead worlds into gardens. Everything humanity had ever dreamed. Oath was being laid out before him. In return, Veltar said, and the images changed to show Earth from space. Your world will contribute 60% of its resources to the collective. Your military forces will be integrated into our defense fleets. Your government will adopt our standardized administrative protocols. Your people will accept oversight from appointed council representatives. The chamber fell silent as Jake absorbed what he was hearing. The offer was everything Earth's leaders had expected and feared. Incredible benefits in exchange for giving up everything that made humanity independent. The Void Swarm approaches your region of space, Veltar announced. Our calculations show it will reach your solar system within 2 of your years. Alone, your species cannot hope to survive. Even your most optimistic projections show complete extinction within months of first contact. Jake thought about the briefings he had received before leaving Earth. President Lisa Carter had been clear about humanity's position. Earth would not trade its freedom for protection, no matter how advanced the technology being offered. But standing here surrounded by the power of the Galactic Council, Jake began to understand the true scope of what humanity was facing. This offer represents the unanimous decision of the Council of 12, Veltar said. It will not be made again. You will provide your answer now. Jake looked around the vast chamber at the thousands of beings watching him. Representatives of civilizations that spanned the galaxy, all waiting to hear what one human would say. He thought about Earth, with its blue oceans and white clouds. He thought about children playing in parks and people working to build better lives for their families. He thought about President Carter's final words to him before he left Earth. Sometimes the only way to stay human is to say no. Jake stood straighter and looked directly at the towering crystal, being that spoke for the most powerful alliance in galactic history. The United Earth government's answer is no, he said clearly. We reject your terms, your protection, and your collective. Humanity will chart its own course. The silence that followed was absolute. For the first time in recorded galactic history, a species had been offered salvation and refused it. Jake gathered the few papers he had brought with him and walked toward the chamber doors. Behind him, he could hear the translation devices, struggling to make sense of the chaos that erupted as thousands of beings began talking at once. As the doors closed behind him, Jake Morrison knew he had just changed the course of galactic history. Whether that change would save humanity or doom, it remained to be seen. President Lisa Carter stood at the podium in the United Nations building in New York, as delegates from every nation on Earth watched her with worried faces. The news of Ambassador Morrison's rejection had reached Earth 3 days ago, and panic was starting to spread among the global population. People understood what it meant when the most powerful alliance in the galaxy offered protection, and Earth said no. My fellow humans, Lisa began, her voice carrying clearly through the packed assembly hall. 3 days ago, our ambassador delivered humanity's response to the Galactic Council. We rejected their offer not out of pride or foolishness, but because we refused to trade our freedom for their protection. Murmurs rippled through the crowd of world leaders. Some looked angry, while others seemed frightened. Lisa had expected this reaction. The decision to refuse the Council's offer had not been made lightly or without knowing the consequences. I know many of you believe we have made a terrible mistake, Lisa continued. You think we should have accepted their technology and their guidance. But I ask you to consider what acceptance would have meant. 60% of our resources given to beings we barely understand. Our military forces scattered across the galaxy under alien command, our governments replaced by their representatives. She paused and looked out at the faces staring back at her. These were the leaders of nations that had fought for centuries to maintain their independence. They understood the value of freedom, even when it came with a terrible price. For the past 8 months, our best scientists have been working on something we call Project Defiance, Lisa announced. Dr. Kevin Walsh will now explain what we have accomplished. A tall man with graying hair stepped up to the microphone. Dr. Walsh had spent the last decade studying every piece of alien technology that had ever fallen into human hands. Crashed ships, abandoned equipment, and the few trade samples the Council had provided over the years had all been carefully analyzed and reverse engineered. We have learned much from our limited contact with galactic civilization, Dr. Walsh began. But more importantly, we have learned about ourselves. Every species that joined the galactic collective stopped innovating. They stopped pushing boundaries and asking difficult questions. They became dependent on shared technology instead of developing their own solutions. He activated a holographic display that showed Earth surrounded by a network of satellites and orbital platforms. The technology looked different from anything the Council had shown them. Where alien designs were smooth and elegant, human engineering was practical and aggressive. Project Defiance has produced 3 major breakthroughs, Dr. Walsh explained. First, we have developed weapon systems based on manipulated gravity fields. These can tear apart enemy ships regardless of their armor or shielding. Second, we have created communication networks using quantum entanglement that cannot be intercepted or jammed. Third, we have built the Aurora Defense Network. The hologram zoomed in to show massive structures positioned throughout the solar system. They looked like mechanical flowers with petals that could open to reveal weapon systems, unlike anything humanity had ever built before. The Aurora network consists of 47 defense stations positioned from Mercury to Neptune. Dr. Walsh continued. Each station is equipped with gravity weapons, particle beams, and quantum torpedoes. More importantly, each station is controlled by human operators who can adapt and improvise in ways that automated systems cannot. General Ben Hayes stood up from his seat in the front row. He was a career military officer who had commanded forces in 3 different conflicts before being chosen to lead Earth's unified defense forces. His weathered face showed the strain of preparing for a war unlike any in human history. The Council believes we are primitive because we still fight wars among ourselves, General Hayes said as he took the podium. They see our conflicts as evidence of our backward nature. But every war we have fought has taught us lessons that no other species in the galaxy possesses. He brought up displays showing human military history from ancient battles to modern warfare. The images were not pretty, but they told the story of a species that had never stopped learning how to fight and survive. Other species joined the collective when they encountered superior technology, General Hayes explained. They assumed that advancement meant peace and cooperation. But humans have always understood that sometimes you must fight for what matters most. Our entire history has prepared us for this moment. Captain Amy Rodriguez sat in the audience listening to the presentations with growing excitement. She had been chosen to command humanity's newest and most advanced warship. The vessel was still under construction in the orbital shipyards above Earth, but when completed, it would represent everything humans had learned about space combat. The ship was called Enterprise, and it was built using principles no other species had ever considered. Where alien vessels prioritized efficiency and standardized design, human engineers had focused on adaptability and redundancy. Every system had multiple backups, and every weapon could be modified or reconfigured during battle. Captain Rodriguez will lead our first deep space patrol, General Hayes announced. Her mission is to establish early warning systems beyond the outer planets and make first contact with any approaching threats. The Enterprise represents our commitment to meeting danger head-on rather than waiting for it to come to us. Amy felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. She had served in Earth's Space Navy for 15 years, but had never commanded anything larger than a destroyer. Now she would be leading humanity's most important mission into the unknown regions where the Void Swarm was slowly approaching. Dr. Walsh returned to the podium with new information that made everyone in the assembly lean forward. Our analysis of Council communications has revealed something disturbing, he said. Every species that joined the collective gradually lost their ability to innovate. Their scientists stopped asking new questions. Their engineers stopped pushing boundaries. Within a few generations, they became completely dependent on shared technology. The implications of this discovery sent chills through the assembled leaders. The Council's offer of advanced technology was not just about protection from the Void Swarm. It was about creating a galaxy of dependent civilizations that could never threaten the established order. We intercepted transmissions from several Council member species, Dr. Walsh continued. Many are expressing doubt about their own integration into the collective. Some are questioning whether their joining was truly voluntary, or simply the result of fear and manipulation. President Carter returned to the podium for her closing remarks. She looked out at the faces of world leaders who had initially opposed the decision to reject the Council's offer. Now many of them were nodding in understanding. Humanity's rejection was not born of arrogance, she said firmly. It was born of careful analysis and an understanding of what we would lose if we accepted their terms. We choose to face the unknown as free beings rather than live as comfortable slaves. As the assembly ended and delegates began filing out, encrypted messages were already being sent to military bases around the world. Project Defiance was moving into its final phase, and every human on Earth would soon discover what their species was truly capable of when fighting for survival and freedom. Captain Amy Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the Enterprise as her ship moved through the darkness beyond Neptune. 3 months had passed since her patrol began, and the crew had grown used to the endless black of deep space. The ship's sensors constantly swept the area, looking for signs of the approaching threat that had consumed so many worlds. The Enterprise was unlike any vessel humanity had ever built. Its hull was covered in armor plates that could shift and adapt during battle. Weapon systems were mounted on rotating platforms that could fire in any direction. Most importantly, every system on the ship could be manually controlled if the computers failed. Human engineers had learned not to trust technology they could not understand or repair. Lieutenant Dan Cooper was monitoring the long-range sensors when he noticed something strange. The readings showed empty space ahead, but there were gravity disturbances that made no sense. Stars were bending light in patterns that violated the laws of physics. Something massive was moving through space, but their instruments could not see it directly. "Captain," Dan called out from his station, "I'm getting readings that don't match anything in our database. There's something out there, but it's not showing up on visual or thermal scans." Amy moved to look at the sensor display. The patterns were unlike anything she had seen during her years of training. Whatever was approaching seemed to exist in normal space while somehow remaining invisible to most detection methods. "All stop," Amy ordered. "Power down all non-essential systems and switch to passive sensors only. If something is out there, I want to see it before it sees us." The Enterprise drifted silently through space as its crew waited and watched. Hours passed without any change in the strange readings. Then the stars themselves began to disappear. One by one, the points of light that had filled the view screen went dark, as something consumed them completely. Amy felt ice form in her stomach as she realized what they were witnessing. This was not a fleet of ships, or even a single massive vessel. This was something that could eat entire star systems and grow stronger from everything it consumed. The Void Swarm had arrived 3 months ahead of all projections. "Battle stations," Amy commanded. "All hands prepare for combat. Transmit our position and status to Earth immediately." The Enterprise powered up its weapon systems as the crew rushed to their positions. The ship had been designed to fight against conventional enemies using tactics that humans understood. But now they faced something that challenged every assumption about warfare and survival. The darkness ahead began to take shape as millions of smaller forms became visible. They looked like geometric patterns that shifted and changed as they moved. Some were triangular, while others appeared circular or square. But all of them seemed to be made from the same dark material that absorbed light and energy. "Weapons are powered and ready," reported Chief Weapons Officer Kate Wilson. "Gravity cannons are charged and quantum torpedoes are loaded. All defensive systems are online." Amy studied the approaching swarm through the view screen. The individual units moved in perfect coordination without any visible communication between them. They flowed through space like a living liquid that could think and plan and hunt. "Target the leading edge of the formation," Amy ordered. "Fire gravity cannons on my mark." The Enterprise's main weapons unleashed beams of twisted space-time that could tear apart any known material. The energy struck the front ranks of the approaching swarm, and several of the geometric shapes simply vanished. For a moment, Amy felt hope that human weapons might be effective against this cosmic threat. Then the destroyed units were instantly replaced by new ones that seemed to form from the debris of their predecessors. The swarm continued forward without slowing down, and Amy realized that conventional attacks would not be enough to stop this enemy. "They're adapting to our weapons," reported Lieutenant Cooper. "The gravity beams are having less effect with each shot. It's like they're learning how to defend against them in real time." The swarm reached weapon range and began its own attack. Beams of pure darkness struck the Enterprise's shields and began eating through them like acid through metal. The ship's defensive systems tried to compensate, but the enemy's weapons seemed to evolve and change with each hit. "Shields are down to 60%, called out Engineer Paul Martin from his station. "Whatever they're using is draining our power faster than we can generate it." Amy made a decision that went against everything she had learned at the Academy. Instead of continuing the long-range battle, she ordered the Enterprise to charge directly into the swarm. Human tactics had always emphasized getting close enough to use superior training and adaptability. "All power to forward shields," Amy commanded. "Take us into the middle of their formation. We're going to fight them the way humans have always fought when faced with superior numbers." The Enterprise plunged into the heart of the swarm as enemy units surrounded it on all sides. The ship's close-range weapons began firing in all directions, while the crew used manual targeting to hit weak points that the computers could not detect. Chief Wilson discovered that the enemy units had difficulty adapting to weapons that were constantly changing. She began modifying the ship's particle beams during combat, shifting frequencies and power levels in random patterns that kept the swarm from developing effective countermeasures. The battle raged for hours as the Enterprise fought its way through wave after wave of enemy units. The ship took heavy damage, but the crew kept fighting with a determination that surprised even themselves. They were not just defending their vessel, but proving that humans could stand against forces that had destroyed entire civilizations. Dr. Kevin Walsh's voice crackled over the communication system from Earth. He had been monitoring the battle through quantum entanglement communication and had made a crucial discovery about the enemy's nature. "The swarm doesn't just consume matter," Dr. Walsh reported. "It absorbs information, memories, and technological knowledge from everything it encounters. That's how it has grown so powerful and why conventional tactics have failed against it. Amy understood immediately what this meant. The swarm learned from every species it fought and used their own knowledge against them. But humans had something that no other species possessed: the willingness to abandon logic and embrace chaos when survival was at stake. All stations listened carefully. Amy announced to her crew, "Forget everything you learned about space combat. We're going to fight this thing using pure human instinct and improvisation. Make every shot different. Change tactics constantly. Be unpredictable." The battle took on a new character as the Enterprise crew abandoned standard procedures and began fighting like cornered animals. They used damaged systems in ways they were never designed for. They fired weapons at point-blank range. They rammed enemy units when ammunition ran low. For the first time since the battle began, the swarm seemed confused. Its perfect coordination began to break down as individual units tried to adapt to opponents who refused to follow any logical pattern of behavior. The Enterprise finally broke free of the swarm after losing half its crew and most of its systems. But the ship limped back toward Earth, carrying the most important intelligence any human had ever gathered. The Void Swarm could be fought and possibly defeated, but only by beings willing to embrace chaos over order. Commander Steve Parker stood in the briefing room aboard the orbital station above Earth as General Hayes explained the most dangerous mission in human history. The intelligence from Captain Rodriguez's encounter with the Void Swarm had revealed a weakness that no other species had ever discovered. The enemy could not adapt to opponents willing to sacrifice themselves completely. "The swarm learns from every encounter," General Hayes said to the assembled volunteers. "It studies how we fight and develops countermeasures for our weapons and tactics. But there is one thing it cannot understand or adapt to: complete self-sacrifice for a greater cause." Steve looked around the room at the faces of men and women who had volunteered for what everyone knew was a suicide mission. They came from every branch of Earth's military and every nation on the planet. All of them had families and lives they would never see again. But all of them understood that their sacrifice might save billions of others. The plan was simple in concept, but terrifying in execution. Small teams of volunteers would pilot specially modified ships directly into the heart of swarm formations. Once inside, they would trigger quantum explosions that would destroy everything within a 50-mile radius, including themselves. "The modified ships have been stripped of all defensive systems," General Hayes continued. "Every bit of space and power has been devoted to quantum explosive devices and faster engines. Your job is to get as deep into the swarm as possible before detonating." Dr. Walsh had worked for weeks to create weapons that could damage the swarm from within. The quantum explosives would tear apart space itself in a way that even the enemy's adaptive abilities could not counter. But someone had to deliver them manually because automated systems could be detected and stopped. Steve had volunteered immediately when the call went out for pilots, willing to make the ultimate sacrifice. He was 34 years old, with no wife or children to mourn him. More importantly, he understood that humanity's survival might depend on proving that some species valued freedom more than their own lives. The first wave of suicide attacks began 3 days later when long-range sensors detected another swarm formation approaching Jupiter. Steve led a squadron of 12 volunteer pilots toward the enemy in ships that looked more like flying bombs than traditional fighters. The swarm responded to their approach by forming defensive patterns designed to intercept incoming attacks. But the human pilots ignored the enemy formations and flew directly into the center of the mass where the most important swarm units were protected. "Remember what we practiced," Steve called out over the radio to his fellow volunteers. "Erratic flight patterns until you reach optimal detonation range. Don't let them predict where you're going." The human ships weaved and spiraled through space in patterns that seemed random and chaotic. The swarm tried to adapt its defensive fire, but could not anticipate movements that followed no logical plan. One by one, the volunteer pilots reached their target zones and triggered their weapons. The explosions tore through the swarm like fire through paper. Entire sections of the enemy formation simply ceased to exist as quantum energy unraveled the fabric of space around them. For the first time in recorded galactic history, the Void Swarm was forced to retreat from a battle. News of the victory spread across human space within hours. But more importantly, it began reaching other species throughout the galaxy, who had given up hope of ever defeating the cosmic threat. The Kerrigan were the first to respond to humanity's example. Ambassador Thackeray arrived at Earth aboard a Kerrigan warship that looked like it had been built for ramming rather than elegant space combat. The Kerrigan were a warrior species that had left the Galactic Council decades earlier because they refused to accept peaceful integration with their enemies. "Your species fights with honor," Thackeray told President Carter during their first meeting. The Kerrigan offer alliance to humans who prove themselves worthy in battle. The Kerrigan brought with them weapons technology that perfectly complemented human tactics. Their ships were built like flying fortresses, with armor thick enough to survive close-range combat. Combined with human adaptability and willingness to take risks, the Alliance created a fighting force unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The Crystalline Velinari were the next species to break ranks with the Galactic Council. A group of their scientists arrived at Earth in ships that looked like floating jewelry boxes. Despite their delicate appearance, the Velinari possessed knowledge of energy manipulation that could enhance human weapons beyond anything Dr. Walsh had imagined. "We have waited centuries for someone to challenge the Council's authority," explained Velinari scientist Crystal through her translation device. "Your species offers something we thought was lost forever: the courage to seek new answers instead of accepting old limitations." Working together, human and alien scientists began developing weapons that combined innovation from multiple species. The resulting technology was chaotic and unpredictable, but devastatingly effective against the swarm's ordered existence. The most surprising allies came from the aquatic Delphi, who had been members of the Galactic Council for over 1,000 years. A faction of younger Delphi arrived at Earth in ships filled with water, where they could swim while controlling their vessels through direct neural interface. "The Council has made our people soft and dependent," explained Delphi Commander Merkai as she floated in her water-filled command sphere. "We remember when our ancestors fought sea monsters in the depths of our home world. It is time to remember those lessons." Captain Rodriguez found herself commanding a mixed fleet of human, Kerrigan, Velinari, and Delphi vessels as they prepared to face the largest swarm formation yet detected. The enemy was approaching the outer colonies with enough force to consume entire solar systems. The combined fleet met the swarm near the mining colonies of the asteroid belt. The battle was unlike anything in galactic military history, as ships from 4 different species fought using tactics that no single civilization could have developed alone. Human pilots continued their suicide runs while Kerrigan warriors used their heavily armored ships as battering rams. Velinari vessels fired energy weapons that could slice through multiple enemy units at once. Delphi ships moved through space like schools of fish, coordinating their attacks through methods that seemed almost telepathic. The swarm tried to adapt to each new tactic, but found itself overwhelmed by the variety of approaches being used against it. Every time it developed a countermeasure for one species, another would attack using completely different methods. As news of the victory spread throughout the galaxy, the Galactic Council faced its worst crisis in millennia. More and more member species began questioning why they had accepted Council authority when alternatives clearly existed. Supreme Mediator Veltar sent urgent communications to all member worlds warning them against joining the human rebellion. But many species had already begun recalling their fleets from Council operations and declaring neutrality in what was becoming a galactic civil war. The old order that had maintained peace through enforced unity was crumbling as beings throughout the galaxy discovered that cooperation could be more powerful than domination. Humanity's simple rejection of an ultimatum had triggered a revolution that would reshape the balance of power among the stars. Supreme Mediator Veltar stood on the bridge of the massive Council flagship as it approached the blue world that had caused so much trouble. Earth hung in space like a jewel, surrounded by the orbital defense stations and shipyards that humans had built in just 2 years. The sight filled Veltar with something the crystalline being had never experienced before. Fear. Behind the flagship came the largest fleet the Galactic Council had ever assembled. Ships from dozens of member species filled space for millions of miles in every direction. Veltar had gathered this armada not to fight the Void Swarm, but to destroy the rebellious humans who had dared to challenge galactic order. Analysis complete, reported the fleet's tactical coordinator, a tall gray being with black mirror eyes. Human defenses are primitive compared to Council technology. We estimate total victory within 6 standard time units. Veltar was not so confident. The humans had already proven they could defeat enemies that should have been impossible to beat. Their chaotic tactics and willingness to sacrifice everything for their beliefs made them unpredictable in ways that threatened the very foundation of galactic civilization. On Earth, President Lisa Carter stood in the Emergency Command Center, deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, as reports flooded in about the approaching Council fleet. The armada was 3 times larger than anything humanity had ever faced. Even with their alien allies, the odds of survival seemed impossible. The Council fleet will reach Earth orbit in 18 hours, reported Admiral Jack Turner, who had been promoted after Captain Rodriguez was assigned to command the Allied fleet. Our defense satellites are powered up and ready, but we're outnumbered. 50-1. Lisa had known this moment would come eventually. The Galactic Council could not allow human independence to spread throughout the galaxy without destroying everything they had built over thousands of years. But she also knew that Dr. Walsh had discovered something about the Council that could change everything. Doctor, Lisa said, turning to the scientist who had spent months analyzing intercepted Council communications, show them what you found. Dr. Walsh activated the holographic display system and filled the room with images that made everyone present gasp in shock. The pictures showed star charts tracking the movement of the Void Swarm over the past 1,000 years. But more importantly, they showed Council fleets deliberately avoiding certain regions of space. The Galactic Council has been allowing the Void Swarm to consume independent civilizations, Dr. Walsh announced. They could have stopped it centuries ago, but chose to let it destroy any species that refused to join their collective. The evidence was overwhelming. Council forces had withdrawn from dozens of systems just before the swarm arrived. They had refused to share defensive technology with species that might have survived on their own. They had used the cosmic threat as a tool to force submission from anyone who valued independence. The Council isn't protecting the galaxy from the Void Swarm, Dr. Walsh continued. They're using it to eliminate anyone who might challenge their authority. Every species that has ever refused integration has been fed to that thing. The implications sent shockwaves through Earth's leadership. The offer of protection in exchange for submission had been a lie from the beginning. The Council had never intended to save humanity. They had planned to let the swarm consume Earth as an example to other species considering rebellion. Admiral Turner prepared Earth's defenses as the Council fleet entered the solar system. The human ships were outnumbered, but they had advantages that the enemy did not expect. 2 years of fighting the Void Swarm had taught humanity lessons about space warfare that no other species possessed. The battle began when Council forces tried to jam Earth's communication networks. But human engineers had learned to build systems that could function even when damaged or disrupted. The defense satellites continued coordinating their attacks even as enemy ships tried to blind them. Supreme Mediator Veltar expected the human resistance to collapse within minutes of the first assault. Instead, the defenders fought with a ferocity that caught the Council forces completely off guard. Earth's orbital platforms unleashed weapons that seemed to violate the laws of physics as humans had understood them. The gravity cannons that Dr. Walsh had developed tore through the elegant Council ships like hammers through glass. The alien vessels had been designed for battles between civilized species using accepted rules of engagement. They were not prepared for weapons that twisted space itself into a weapon. But the real shock came when ships from other species began arriving to defend Earth. Kerrigan warships dropped out of hyperspace, firing their massive projectile weapons. Velinari energy vessels appeared like floating crystals that burned through everything in their path. Delphi formations moved through space like living ocean currents. Council fleet elements are withdrawing from combat, reported the tactical coordinator with disbelief in his voice. The Thakreen Third Fleet has declared neutrality. The Azari formations are requesting permission to disengage. Veltar watched in horror as the carefully constructed alliance that had ruled the galaxy for millennia fell apart in the space of hours. Species that had been loyal Council members for centuries were either joining the human rebels or simply refusing to fight. The battle reached its climax when Ambassador Jake Morrison broadcast a message to every ship in both fleets. The man who had started the rebellion by saying no to the Council's ultimatum appeared on screens throughout the solar system. People of the galaxy, Jake began, his words translated into hundreds of languages simultaneously. Today we fight, not just for Earth's freedom, but for the right of every species to choose their own destiny. The Council has lied to you for thousands of years. They have used fear to control you and threats to keep you in line. The broadcast included all of Dr. Walsh's evidence about the Council's manipulation of the Void Swarm, species throughout. The galaxy learned that their protectors had been deliberately allowing the cosmic threat to consume independent worlds to maintain their own power. The revelation shattered what remained of Council authority. Ship after ship broke formation and either joined the human alliance or withdrew from the battle entirely. Within hours, the massive armada that had come to destroy Earth was reduced to a handful of loyal vessels protecting Veltar's flagship. "Is impossible," Veltar said, as reports continued pouring in about fleets declaring independence throughout the galaxy. Order cannot exist without authority. Civilization cannot survive without unity. But Jake Morrison's final words proved the crystalline being wrong. Unity is not the same as uniformity, Jake declared. Cooperation is more powerful than domination. Today we begin building a galaxy where every species can contribute their unique strengths instead of surrendering their identity. The old Galactic Council dissolved within days as member species either joined the new Free Galactic Alliance or withdrew to govern themselves independently. Veltar and the remaining Council loyalists retreated to their home systems, where they tried to maintain their authority over ever-shrinking territories. The Void Swarm, faced with unified resistance from dozens of species using tactics inspired by human innovation, began its first retreat in recorded galactic history. The cosmic threat that had consumed entire civilizations found itself unable to adapt to enemies who valued freedom more than survival. 5 years later, Captain Amy Rodriguez stood on the observation deck of the Alliance headquarters station, watching children from 20 different species play together in the Central Park. Human children ran alongside young Kerrigan warriors, and baby Delphi splashed in shallow pools, while Velinary crystals pulsed with gentle light. The galaxy had not become perfect, there were still conflicts and disagreements between species. But now those conflicts were resolved through negotiation between equals rather than orders from distant rulers. Innovation flourished as beings from different worlds shared knowledge and ideas freely. Humanity's simple rejection of an ultimatum had saved more than just Earth. It had liberated an entire galaxy from tyranny and shown that sometimes the only way to preserve what matters most is to be willing to lose everything in its defense.